So today we're going to be speaking about how corporations and investors make decisions about what new technologies to invest in. And before we get going, I'm going to introduce our esteemed panel. Actually, I'm going to embarrass them by reading their very impressive bios to you guys, or at least portions of them aloud. So starting all the way down there, we've got Anna Barber. Anna is a partner at M13, an early stage venture capital fund investing in market expanding technologies, where she focuses on AI applications, e-commerce infrastructure, and B2B marketplaces. She's the chair of Pledge LA, an initiative dedicated to increasing diversity in the LA tech community. She was named one of Forbes 50 over 50 in 2023 for her leadership in venture capital. She's a former founder and operator herself and began her career as a corporate lawyer and McKinsey strategy consultant. She received both of her BA and her JD from Yale University. Next to Anna, we have Stephen Kahn. Stephen is a director of product strategy and AI safety for Google Cloud AI. Stephen's responsible for managing the overall strategy and operations of Google Cloud's AI products. He joined Google in 2011 and helped launch and grow Google Drive, Chrome OS, and Google Wi-Fi and Android, consumer products which are now used by billions of people worldwide. Before joining Google, Stephen was an entrepreneur and venture capitalist. He studied applied physics at Yale. And we have Danielle Cohn. Danielle is the CEO of Wave Ventures, a strategic advisor to growth companies on innovation and accelerator models, business development, and partnerships. She built and led the global startup accelerator Lift Labs at Fortune 30, Comcast, NBC Universal, where she was the bridge between the C-suite and a diverse network of founders the enterprise partnered with across strategic areas of the business. An angel investor and 3 times founder, in 2023, Danielle launched My Inspirement, a trusted guide for introspective workshops and platform for communities of choice, curating micro blue zones, shared intergenerational alternative lifestyles. She serves as an EIR at Yale. And then we have Melissa Fensterstock. Melissa aspires to help shape the future of human and planetary health. She has interest in frontier technology, helping early stage companies translate innovations from academic settings to commercial scale. At Material Impact Fund, she's an early stage deep tech investor and operator. She's the co-founder and former CEO of Lansdowne Labs, a spin out from MIT co-founded with Robert Langer. Melissa is an expert in residence at Digitalis Commons, where she supports a foundational partnership with the United States ARPA-H, a newly formed federal agency focusing on funding breakthrough technologies in biomedicine and health. Additionally, she's an EIR at Yale University, Climate Haven, Johns Hopkins University, and formerly of Columbia University. She's a trustee of Connecticut Public and a member of the Milken Young Leadership Circle. And last but not least, Kevin King. Kevin's a longtime startup person and former founder whose North Star is helping startups be successful. Currently, Kevin works for the Startup B team at AWS, working with startups in top accelerators like Techstars and Capital Factory. He's based outside of New York, but works with programs in the eastern half of the United States. If you think he can be helpful, he's happy to connect. So welcome. I'm going to start with, you can clap for them, they earned it. So Danielle, we'll start with you. So you've supported thousands of startup founders while you led Lift Labs at Comcast. How'd you help them navigate the larger organization? How close to product market fit they needed to be successful? And how'd you approach the teams with emerging technologies that might not have been ready for use today, but that could have helped Comcast in the future?
Thanks for having us today. Now we're on. So just to, I think, step back for everyone in the room who is building something or is a part of a startup right now, and you're going to try to sell into enterprise. It's no different than, in some ways, selling to investors, right? You have to convince them that you have a problem, you're solving a problem, that you're at a stage that people will take you seriously, and that you have figured out how to apply your technology in a way that is relatable, and that solves a problem, or solves a problem that companies don't even know that they have. And so when I was at Comcast, a big part of my job was to work with the business leaders to actually identify areas of focus each year that they were most interested in learning about. And a lot of times emerging technologies weren't even part of that list. And so it was up to our team to really find these hidden gems and help the founders to make a case for why their emerging technology was something we should care about. There were always challenges that would come up, especially as it relates to intellectual property, or anything that's too close to the core. And I think that continues to happen at large companies. So it's really about, how do you find a champion inside a large company who thinks what you're building is special enough, that your team is special enough, and that you're thinking about it in a unique way that can solve a specific problem, whether or not the company knows it or not.
Yeah. Anybody else have anything to add on that?
I mean, sure. We talk about that startups a lot. I sit on the AWS Startup BD team. A lot of startups get started and think they want Amazon as their first customer. I highly recommend against that usually, because it's, once you solve for Amazon, you're potentially only solve for Amazon. There are not a lot of Amazons out there. However, they're super interested in what you're doing, and they're super interested in strategic partners. So, my job's a lot of enterprise to startup translation, and oftentimes both sides don't understand what the other side can do for them, but the partnership and the impact can be huge.
I guess.
I think there's a really interesting thing happening right now with artificial intelligence with respect to enterprise applications, because it's actually possible in some cases to show the impact that your technology can have before you even talk to your potential enterprise customer. So we just invested in a company called Maven AGI. It was actually announced, the deal was announced like 20 minutes ago, and OpenAI just published a case study about Maven and what they're doing building on top of OpenAI. But what their strategy has been is to actually, Maven is an AI for customer support. And they also published a case study with TripAdvisor showing that it's independently addressing like 90% of the incoming customer support tickets. But what they can do in a sales situation is actually build a version of Maven easily on publicly available information on the company's website, and then bring that to the sales meeting. And so that's just incredibly powerful in solving this problem or this challenge that Danielle was talking about showing, what the impact is. Whereas with a traditional SaaS product, I think it's a lot more difficult to do that. So I think that is one of the reasons that we're seeing such really surprising uptake on the part of enterprises with some of these AI technologies.
That's great. Yeah, actually, that's a great segue to a question I have for Stephen, because we're hearing a great deal about the potential for AI, and Google's obviously at the forefront of innovation and around all these things. How do you balance your core business at Google against some of the innovation that you see and wanting to get plugged into some new technologies?
That's an interesting question. Hello? All right, good.
Yeah, good.
When I think about Google and how we decide kind of where to invest, there's two regimes. One is in core R&D, research and development, and then one is in applications. And I like to think about them that way because in the kind of criteria for what are interesting problems to solve change. When it comes to where we invest in our core R&D, we try not to think too much about, our existing businesses, think about the trade-offs. Like, we just look for very large, very deep, interesting problem spaces where there is, very deep, a lot of ambiguity, but where one can still articulate an interesting goal to achieve. It could be something like protein folding with AlphaFold, or winning chess or Go, right? But some goal that you can articulate, and then adding in where does as any organization should, what's kind of our differential advantage here? What do we bring to the table? And in the case of Google, it could be lots of resources in compute or lots of AI engineers, etc. But try to keep it fairly unconstrained or unencumbered with the business side. And I think it's kind of interesting, being here at Yale, in the School of Management, right, surrounded by all these incredible research, departments to think about. Okay, there's kind of a research piece, and then there's the applications piece. And when we're building applications, when we're building, applying these technologies, then these factors do come into play, where we have to think about, what can this, what are the advantages and what are the disadvantages of building this product within Google. So one of the products that you mentioned, that one of my first project at Google was Google Drive, now 11, 12 years ago. And for us, we said, hey, look, can we clearly describe a user problem and an opportunity here? Then we said, okay, well, do we have, some resources and advantages here? And we had lots of data centers, so lots of storage, we had Gmail and, so we have user accounts, and it's okay. And then, do we think that we can do something kind of different or new and bring that to the table in an environment? If we rewind 10 years or 11 years or 12 years now, there was Dropbox, and I think Microsoft had a product out or was coming. And we said, yeah, we think we have kind of a different kind of view on how people interact with content, and more of a search paradigm rather than folders and file structures, right? You could see that evidenced in Gmail with labels, and it's just very search oriented. So we said, yeah, I think we have some perspective here. Then you have to take into account, okay, yeah, how will it impact the business? In the case of Google Drive, very complementary, but not always the case. A few years ago, we launched the Pixel phone line, when Google starts to get in the business of creating its own smartphones, then we start to compete potentially with our partners, the Samsungs of the world, who we rely on. And so there, we just have to be very thoughtful about kind of how we can do, what tactics we can employ in the short term, and then ultimately in the long term, where do we think this will, evolve? Straight to the AI point, and when it comes to chatbots and search and ChatGPT and all these things, there's certainly the potential for chatbots and generative AI to displace usage of search. But I think in the long run, the way we think about it, the way I think about it certainly, is these are all tools and technologies that now allow people to do a fundamental human activity, which is to intake knowledge, make sense of it, interact with it, and then ultimately make some decisions. And that's a very deep well. And I think if you look at it from that perspective, what we have today with the Google search bar, as amazing as it is, and how much it's evolved over the past 15 and 20 years, it's still only, each of us can think about how we collect information through other mechanisms, and how we synthesize information that don't involve Google search. So I think if you think about that, well, it's super deep, and in the long run, all these technologies will work together, and ultimately, if we can be a part of the activity of people understanding information, synthesizing it, coming to conclusions, then we'll be in a good place.
And for those technologies, do you predominantly build them in-house, or do you make investments and acquisitions, or is it all of the above?
Well, we famously have made some very good acquisitions, YouTube and Android. There are others which some you've heard of, and I won't name them, but we could get into that, sure. And some that you haven't heard of. So it is absolutely a mix. We're always looking at new technologies out there. I came to Google through a startup. And so, I was acquired in as well. And I think we will continue to be very active in acquiring. But I think, was it Kevin? I think you said that there's only one Amazon out there. And if you kind of build your business to serve Amazon or to be acquired by Amazon, you may then end up building a business that is not good to service most customers, or to be a strategic partner or acquired by most customers.
So I turn that to Anna and Melissa, really. I mean, when you have companies that you're invested in that are thinking about taking investments or entering into partnerships with the Comcasts or the Amazons or the Googles of the world, what kind of advice do you give to those companies?
Definitely be careful.
I'm interim CEO of one of our portfolio companies now, and this is a real live example. We had a strategic investor, a strategic partner potentially on the commercial side who also had a CVC, and they were interested in investing and made a ton of data requests. And you want to be open and transparent because clearly, we want their investment. However, in the 9th hour, they choose not to invest. And you're like, oh man, I just shared all this information with you. We have an NDA, but is there really a Chinese wall there? Like, how much information do they really know? Does the fragility of the company potentially put our commercial contracts at risk, right? And so I think there's just this balance of you want to be transparent and assume the best in people, but at the end of the day, these are operating companies that are probably sharing information. So just being, trying to err on the side of caution when possible. I think a decade ago, as a financial investor, I probably would have looked at corporate investment sort of less favorably maybe than today. I think that the CVC world has really matured and developed, and to the point that there's strong awareness in the CVC community of these potential conflicts, and they are better at kind of creating lines, and also recognizing that the companies, in order to flourish, need to maintain the potential for other exits other than exiting to them. So we're much more open to and excited about, partners that could also be customers. I've also seen founders use as a carrot the potential of investment in order to get interest from the commercial side. We have a portfolio company right now, and I won't say who they are because this is a little sneaky of what they're doing, but they have a very hot investment round coming together that everybody wants into. And so they're approaching all of the corporates who are then serving up their commercial contacts, as a kind of carrot to say, let us into the deal and we'll get you a partnership. And who knows whether they'll actually make space for all of those corporate VCs. But it's interesting because, there's so many more CVCs now. The world is just so much more developed. And I think they do play a really valuable role.
And I'm just going to add to that one thing, because these are great points, is that at Lift Labs, I was not part of the CVC team. So there are many different pockets of company inside large companies who are not necessarily investing from a traditional investment perspective, but are essentially your business development arm. And I used to tell people, I'd rather get the business, I'd rather grow the customer base than get any investment, frankly, because you could get investment, but you might not get any traction in the business because the business leader who is in charge of buying that product does not like your product. And so oftentimes I think there's much more alignment now where programs like Lift Labs are actually de-risking the CVC investment up front and getting traction before an investment is even made. But often, the other thing that we used to hear was we didn't get investment from Comcast Ventures. Their incentives were very different than my team's incentives. And so that also wasn't a bad thing. It didn't mean it was a bad thing, but in the minds of, say, a startup, it was. So it's just important, I think, to get to know whatever companies you're pitching to down the road, big, small, understand the nuances of how they're structured and don't just lean on the CVC teams.
Yeah, all great points. So Anna, we'll turn back to you. So you've invested in hundreds of startups. How do you decide when it's too early to invest, when you're talking about emerging technology? How do you consider the team at the various stages? Not that you need to share all your secrets with us, but tell us a little bit about your process.
So I'll answer now for M13, which is where I'm investing. It's different. It's a different lens than when I was at Techstars investing in pre-seed startups, or the Fund LA, we're doing pre-seed. So at M13, we're primarily a Series A fund. We also do seed rounds. And we're really looking for companies working in large markets or large potential markets. So we say market expanding technologies. For us, that means sort of the big buckets of spending. So we think about enterprise software, healthcare, fintech, and commerce enablement. And in terms of stage, I think there's two lenses. One is very experienced team that's done it before can be a little bit earlier, really more around the idea stage. Even in some cases, we've invested pre-revenue, even though we're primarily a Series A team, a Series A investment firm, if the team has a strong track record. For teams that are new, we do love to also back first-time founders, but in that case, we are looking for a little bit more traction to be a little bit more, down the road. AI has thrown a very interesting, wrench in sort of the works of how do we evaluate traction for a couple of reasons. One is because there's so much funding being put into both the foundational layer and the application layer in AI that valuations are inflated in that category. But the second reason I think is that there's a lot of traction out there that might not actually indicate product market fit because there's a lot of trial, as I was discussing before, right? There are a lot of enterprises trying things. So you might see a company very quickly get to $1 million in revenue, but we don't understand the longevity of that revenue, how sticky it's going to be, because on the corporate side, we are all very early in discovering and understanding how we're going to actually use this new technology to drive our business forward. So that's sort of a non-answer to your question, but we do like to see companies out in market with a product and some evidence of traction that indicates, some product market fit.
Yeah, I guess I'll ask the same question of Melissa. Similar question. Yeah, but what are you looking for?
Certainly, product market fit is really important. Yeah. When you talk about de-risking a venture, you have technical risk and then you have commercial risk. And so in our business, we're looking at deep tech ventures, which are hardware driven, definitely not software. And so with these businesses as well, there's no one size fits all business model. So a lot of the challenge of building and scaling a deep tech venture is really around, again, identifying hair on fire problem, right? That's number one. Having paying customers, because without that, there really isn't market pull. And then also really trying to figure out what's the best business model for this business, because across our portfolio, we have 32 companies now. There's rarely one business model that is duplicated. And so really trying to understand that and really tailor it to the customer base. The other thing too, is we talk a lot about as a firm, is it's not easy, but you can sell a venture on vision, right? To some point, and then eventually you have to deliver and you have to have revenue, and it's not just the vision anymore, right? So getting to the point where you have maybe $1 to $3 or $5 million of revenue is one milestone, but then there's this chasm to getting to a point where you've built a business of value, right? Like you can say your company's worth $1 billion because private investors are willing to value it at that. But unless you actually have a strategic buyer or acquirer who's willing to say your business is worth $1 billion, it's not worth $1 billion, right? And so what we're spending a lot of time with our companies is helping them traverse that chasm from, 1 to 5 million of revenue to a point where you've built a business to, call it 15 or 100 million of profitable business, built a profitable business where you actually are a valuable business.
And how do you help them de-risk the process to get there?
Yeah, we're still working on that, but part of it, I think is really having strong syndicate partners, because in deep tech, the capital requirements to get to a business that's scaled could be, 100, 200, $500 million. So making sure that when you're building the syndicate for these early stage rounds, that you have investors around the table that aren't just putting in their, 1 to 3 million up front, but that they have the reserves to put in 10, 15, 20, right around the table to help build the business through that chasm. And then also developing relationships with firms that are a little bit more advanced in the capital stack, more growth equity earlier, and having them close to the company. So when the time is right, that they can support.
Yeah, so Kevin, when you're in the Amazon startup ecosystem, and you're thinking about how the teams within it find a solution for Amazon, other than just telling them not to focus only on Amazon and put all their eggs in the Amazon basket, what are some of the things that you could tell these companies about de-risking their technology?
Yeah, that's great. I should clarify a little bit, like first customer, right? Amazon as a first customer is very challenging, especially when you're working on product market fit. You're trying to be super nimble. You can kind of almost do anything. It's almost easier to be like, we do this and we do this incredibly well, because Amazon will be demanding and have all these kind of creative things. going back to like the CVC and all these things, like you should look for people like my team that can help you navigate and understand what's important. Like in the Climate Pledge Fund, what is important there? In the Innovators Fund, what is important there? Oftentimes, what seems obvious is totally incorrect, and what seems totally not obvious is actually what they're looking for. So for us, my job is I spend about 30% of my time navigating Amazon. We have horrible job titles, terrible job descriptions, and we're a behemoth of all these different animals. So how do we go figure out who is the right person to talk to? And like one of Claudia's companies had made a real inroads with the totally wrong team. I mean, had gone far and was really excited. And I had to be like, hey, you're just like not even it's not even the right zip code. You're not even in the right country. It's this woman over here who's actually going to control all your destiny. So I think it's like asking people, again, look for BD people, look for startup folks who can speak startup and kind of be that translation layer. Find someone internally who like ultimately isn't a decision maker. I mean, that's, I think the power of my role is I can't get you to yes. That I can only take you to the promised land and say, here's how you should talk about it. Here's what's important. I used to be in the mobile space for I spent like 2 decades in the year of mobile. And one thing we figured out as application developers was if you were not kind of hitting the 3 awesome things Apple thought was really important at that time, which they were not publicizing, we had to like figure it out. It didn't matter if you had like incredible whatever, you were never getting featured. So like those little insider things, like figure out the teams that have done that. If you're in a community of startups, like ask, hey, have you ever, what's about the startup team? Like, and everyone's got one. Google's got a great team. Azure's got great teams. Like that's just in the cloud space, but all these people, for me, like we're a bunch of former founders who love helping startups, and we found somebody who's a huge enterprise. So the value of my job is I spend all day solving startup problems, and I spend 0 time worrying if AWS is going out of business, which is awesome. This job could be gone tomorrow. Don't get me wrong, but like there's a real pleasure there. So when you find these people, they're willing to go to the distance, and they're willing to move at startup speed, and then tell you, hey, like I'll be real clear with companies like, this is going to move at enterprise speed, which is going to be disappointing, but at least you'll know, right? Because I rip off Brene Brown all the time. Like clarity is kind, especially when you're in the startup space. You don't have the luxury of, if you're sitting kind of idle on a channel you think is proceeding and you're really just dead in the water, you'd be much better off knowing you're dead in the water.
Danielle's got something to add to that.
Just love that. And just to add to that, oftentimes we would get approached by founders building something that, they thought was the perfect fit for our company. And it might be, but the timing, it's all about the timing. And so the themes that have come out around accelerator projects and programs that exist at companies, I think are really important to follow. If a certain company is running an AI-focused accelerator or calls for startups, or, we're looking to match founders and enterprise, there's a lot of value, I think, now in these highly focused programs because those companies have dedicated the time and their business leaders are taking the time and have said, yes, this is important enough to us that we're going to theme this for this quarter. When we first started Lift Labs, it was a free-for-all, and it was crazy and extremely overwhelming. The thousands of companies that knocked on our door, we couldn't help any of them really because it was like trying to, again, fit like round peg into a square. And so there's something, I think, to be said about more and more of the accelerator programs like Venture Fuel or Techstars or others where there's an actual theme. Do your research there based on the technology that you're building, not just on, do you think your product is a fit for this company at this time? And I've seen that has become a really good investment thesis too. So what's happening is a lot of accelerators at companies are being followed on by their CVCs or even by other funds who are following the track of, say, AI, and they're investing after a program of some sort has realized that the product is there, that there's proof of concepts or actual pilots that are happening before anyone's making any investments.
I just wanted to go back to what Kevin said about knowing that you're dead in the water being really valuable instead of like continuing to chase. Like that's also true with investors. Like it's like don't chase after an investor who's just not that into you. And I see people do that a lot because we all have happy ears and like we want to believe it's going to work out. But one of the best questions I get at the end of a pitch meeting when I'm talking to a founder is like, so what do you think? Right. And they're putting me on the spot to give a point of view. And it's like very smart to do that because I'm actually going to tell them what I think. It's like you were saying, clarity is kind, right? It's like, I'm going to tell them what I think, and then they're going to know exactly where they stand, right? And how much of a shot it is. That's just good. That's just good business. It's not, it's not personal. It's not about hurting anyone's feelings. It's like, I know a company that did 289 investor meetings before they found an investor that, painful, right? Nobody wants to go through that, like nobody, but like, it's good to know. And you can't get through a process like that if you're not clear on where you are. So it's like your biggest asset as a founder is like time. And if you're wasting your time chasing either a customer or an investor that is not going to ultimately work out, then you're just taking away time from doing some productive activity. So.
No, it sounds like great advice in all areas of life.
Right. I mean, he's just not that into you. Move on,
Yeah, I think they made a movie about that. Yeah. And wrote a book too, right? No, this is great. So I'm going to put each of you on the spot and ask you a couple more questions before we turn it over to the audience. But we've got 5 of you and you're all on the cutting edge of what's next. And happy to you give away the secret sauce for the CBCs, what you guys are looking for, but I'm not asking you to do that. What do you guys see as what's coming next? Not necessarily for you, but what's coming next. We'll just go down the line, starting with Kevin and work our way down.
All right. So for me personally, I am super real products that are leveraging generative AI. That really is a thing. We've talked about this in our prep call. 2 years ago, you could raise a huge bunch of money by just saying I'm a Gen AI company. Now you are a company doing XYZ, leveraging Gen AI. And I think that's the real difference. I find personally much more satisfying because you're going to build real business models. It's not frothy revenue. It's actually going to really generate and change things. So, my example, when we come to the mentor, they're, training for the deskless worker. And what they realized was one of their challenges has been the onboarding. So now they just ingest customers' handbooks. And so like in 20 minutes, they've got great answers to the 15 text message questions they need to launch. So they can start today. Like if I sign you up today, you're ready to go. We can start tomorrow versus, it goes on the desk of someone who didn't buy into this thing. You're like, I got to make what? Blah, blah, blah. Like all those things. Just go back to the top of your question about Gen AI really helps you. You can do a lot of cool things around big companies. A little bit of word of warning. And again, Amazon, I saw this all the time. Like the cobbler's kids have no shoes. We build incredible products for our customers. We do not always have great stuff for ourselves. So it can take you 5 minutes to dazzle your potential client or customer. However, spend an hour making sure those answers are right because you're treading into kind of dangerous territory where you're potentially going to be telling them like, hey, your baby's ugly because this is what the internet thinks of your business, like which is like, we give away 1 million credits. Wrong, we don't. We give away 100,000. Like so, those things are worth spending extra time. So again, product market, real products, leveraging Gen AI is what I'm really excited about.
I'm going to talk a little bit about market dynamics and what we're seeing and what's coming. As we all know, like 2020, 21, 22, the days of, high valued companies is behind us. And so now we're seeing a lot of insider led rounds and companies being, kept alive through this difficult time. But what that also means is that, early stage investors like Material Impact, when we would normally be investing in a lot of emerging technology out of universities that are pre-revenue, there's now this whole crop of companies that might have $5 million of revenue, might have had, $50 million of grant research and development that's behind them that, are helping them really establish that product market fit. And so there's a lot of these companies that are really fundamentally good companies, but are just stuck in a bad spot. And so there's capital that's being driven towards those companies right now that is coming at the expense potentially of, out of the lab, napkin early stage concepts. So that's just one thing that I'm seeing a lot of. And as we look at investing and deploying capital, those are the tough decisions that are having to be made. And from a sector perspective, I've been spending a bit of time on the space economy, space to earth, technologies that scale with satellites, and then also food tech. We have to feed our growing population and have more sustainable practices.
The areas of focus that I'm most interested in are what I think we as humans just need right now, which is the space of care, caregiving, the care space, community spaces, and travel. Like I think about those three as, and that's not just like travel for the sake of travel, but mobility. And even from like an AI perspective, when I think about elder fraud and the impact that I don't know how many times a week I get a call from a family member who has been scammed or tried to be scammed. There are, I think, just major issues that we have to solve as a society from an equity perspective as well. I'm still a very big believer in supporting underrepresented founders and believe that a lot of those sectors I just mentioned are best served by founders from underserved and underrepresented backgrounds. And then the other piece of it is alternative funding sources. So aside from VC funding, like what is next? There has to be new models for funding. And I think your points are perfect from a VC perspective, not necessarily fitting a model or a mold that we're used to today. And there's so many incredible new technologies, but also big problems being solved by people who just are not able to raise money for systemic issues. And so that's when I think about the future, that's what keeps me up.
All right, fun question. Well, I'm from Google, so guess what? In the future, AI. Tons of opportunity, tons of potential. But I think it's really important that when I say AI, while it can really capture the imagination and think, in ways, artificial general intelligence, ways that are quite exciting, but also potentially scary. I think it's important that, we think about that possibility and that future as distinct from what AI can do and is doing today. They're both important to think about, but I hear too often people, society, we like to put things up on a pedestal so that we can knock it down, right? And so I see too often AI, the AI hype, and it's overhyped. If you are focusing on, that we think that the robot overlords are coming or that type of thing, and it's like, well, it is or it isn't. There's a whole layer underneath that of what AI is doing today and how it's actually changing how people work. I talked a little bit about, just making sense of knowledge and information, like very pragmatically, that comes into play on a government agency website where people are trying to understand what are the rules and regulations related to visas, passports, those types of things. And there's a lot of very complex kind of documents that they don't have time or maybe don't have the language skills to read through. But AI can make that information much more accessible by engaging people in a dialogue and a question and answer environment. Also by, through translation. Another example that, one of the a very, very well-established American industrial company, steel production, they have a lot of heavy machinery. This heavy machinery has binders full of like repair manuals and how to. It's very complex. And they have very, very, very skilled technicians, mechanics, experts that work on these. However, as they're trying to train up new people, or if there's a new piece of equipment, how do they go through that process? Well, AI today can ingest all of those manuals. You can tune the AI to understand that, hey, the people in the field use this terminology for that doohickey. They don't use what it's called in the manual, right? And then create something that on a tablet, an iPad, they can just start interacting and start asking questions, hold the iPad up, grab a picture, and then start to then figure out, okay, how am I going to, repair this piece of equipment? These are all very real, they're happening now, applications of AI. And I think we're just going to see more and more of these.
And that's a great segue, because that application layer that Stephen was just talking about is exactly where we are investing at M13. So we're not looking to invest in the large language model layer, the foundational layer. We're leaving that to the Googles and the Amazons and the OpenAIs and Microsofts and Anthropics of the world. But when you think about applications built on top of AI, as Stephen described, they need to be adapted for different vertical use cases, and they can provide incredible value if there's a founding team that's really thinking deeply about what's the customer problem they're looking to solve. So we invested in a company called Polymorphic that is creating AI-enabled workflows to allow people to interact with local governments better, to apply for a permit for a street party or understand their local building codes, kind of exactly like you were describing. We invested in a company called Caregnostics that is looking at healthcare data in a much more granular way than is really possible for a human doctor to ingest to identify signs of disease, starting with kidney disease. So these are examples of, and then Maven AGI, the customer service application. I mean, wouldn't it be amazing if we could all have delightful customer service experiences that solved our problem in seconds, right? So these are, some of this as an impact is small, but some of it is actually really, really meaningful on a human level, as well as on a business level. And it's that application layer, that we are investing in across, the categories that we hear about. And we believe that it's both overhyped maybe in the short term, but like a lot of these things probably underhyped in the long term in terms of the impact that AI is going to have on, how we all work and live.
That's great, especially when you get the panel going full circle, where Kevin starts it off by saying he's looking for real products built on generative AI, and then you come out with like 3 or 4 at the end that you're already invested in. So works out well. So we're running out of time. I do want to make sure we get to audience questions, but maybe we just go quickly down the line. So we've got a lot of innovators and entrepreneurs in the audience. I'm sure of it. I'm just looking around. I know some of them. Is there one piece of advice that you'd give them? And I know you've already given a bunch of advice. But Anna, I know you've given a bunch of advice, but I know we've got a couple of others in here that you gave when we spoke in the prep call. So maybe we'll go back down the line and let Anna start.
I think, keep your focus on solving a real problem for customers. Don't fall in love with your product. And I think like with a lot of AI, you can get really excited about what it can do and make sure that what it can do is something that's actually useful for someone who's going to pay for it.
Remember that you as the founder or CEO or founding team, that you are the captains of the ship. It may not always feel that way because you're on the weak side of a negotiation, because you're trying to close that sale, because you're trying to get that investor. But remember, it's your vision and your inspiration, and you will determine where your company goes. Don't let others determine that for you.
In addition to just building something that the world actually needs, I would say beware of innovation theater, and as founders, how sometimes you can be taken advantage of giving out too much information or spending too much time educating others that maybe you're trying to sell to, who will never buy your product or never invest in you, giving them a little too much time for the purpose of their learning, unless you really feel like it's a two-way street.
Work with co-founders and investors that you inherently trust and that will always have your back, because it's the most important, to have a team of people around you that you trust and can work with. Without that, your business will fail.
Ask for help along the way. Lots of people will give you infinite amount of time, energy, and support. They want to see you be successful. But oftentimes you have to ask, and a pointed ask that the person or mentor you're talking to can easily define if they met that give me one customer who you think I can talk to. Don't put this out to your network because I can't define if I ever a finish line. But if I say one, the reality is each of us will give you one and one of us is going to give you 10.
All great advice, and we're back on schedule, so that's great. Yes.
First, great panel. Thank you guys so much. Second, I want to reinforce what Anna and Steven said about some of the applications of AI. We're a venture firm. We're a company called Advocate that's helping disabled Americans put together disability insurance applications using AI. And such a great use case because these are 400-page documents, and the government, it has to be, every single line has to be correct for them to even look at it. And it's just a great application. There are hundreds more like that. So I think this sort of citizen government interface is an important area for innovation. Question for you guys. You mentioned earlier, kind of been a difficult year and a half for early stage companies. You know, we're thinking a lot about the impacts of antitrust right now on M&A, and we're already seeing some chilling effects in terms of sort of appetite for acquisitions by the Google and Amazon of the world because of concerns over the FTC activity. I'm just curious, both as investors and people play significant roles in large enterprises, if you see that as well.
Yes, Stephen, you want to?
I'll just briefly, not particularly. It certainly comes up, but it's usually in the category of what they call champagne problems. So it's a really, really large target acquisition that is as significant in their space that then is being acquired by like a Google or an Amazon. So I would say not significantly. When it comes to looking at acquisitions and where to invest, the majority of them won't kind of hit that hurdle. So we're out there looking and
I was asking so big to attract their attention. At that point, you're already celebrating $10 million.
or more.
Yeah. Does anybody else have
And I'd
thoughts?
say similar to us that, you know, it's the really, really massive ones. You can see a couple come to mind, but in general, I don't, it feels a little bit like your LinkedIn feed. Like I think there's a lot more doom than reality there, but there's also probably used to be a lot more success than reality there too. If to be quite honest.
Anyone else have anything to add before? Okay, sir.
Thank you for coming today. My name is Mark Matthias. As I travel around a lot of places, most people have not heard of Connecticut in terms of what it is or where it is. Give me two things as to why, what you would tell somebody who wants to start a business in Connecticut. Why Connecticut?
Well, I mean, I don't see many people who've got businesses that they've started in Connecticut here, but I'm sure somebody can come up with something.
I mean, we did a lot of work with Stanley Black & Decker in Hartford. Incredible good bones, great structure, great cost of living, access to talent, great universities, and you know, I mean,
Not leaving much for anybody else.
you know, at the end of the day, like, you know, I think we're in a stage post-pandemic, all these other things where only so many people want to be in San Francisco, even though that's the number one, right? Only so many people want to be in New York, and the talent is not that. I think there's a mismatch between talent where they want to be and the opportunities there. So I think Connecticut, because you're in striking distance of New York, you're in striking distance of Boston, is an incredible opportunity. And like if you meet Jess Lynch, she's out there floating around today. She wants Connecticut to be awesome, and she's incredible. So like that, I think that's a lot of Connecticut is going to get a unique value prop, in my opinion. I live in New York, by the way, but I would like to live in Connecticut.
Yeah, I'm not sure if anybody else has anything to add, but you know, beyond the location and the talent pool and the generally nice lifestyle, I'd also add that the state's devoted a lot of resources to innovation, and I think I've seen a couple people in this room from Connecticut Innovations who's jump-started hundreds, if not thousands, of companies, and is one of the more prominent early-stage investors around. So,
Any of those emerging markets. That's a great idea, right? Connecticut wants you to be successful. There's hundreds of thousands of people in New York who don't give a rip, and that's or this is my day job, or do you manufacture cash? Then I'm not interested. Like, so Connecticut wants to be successful.
I've got a few people, but
I would just add one thing to that, which is Connecticut has a great program for founders called the Angel Tax Credit, and it has helped my business a ton. So I think that's one really positive thing. An angel investor can get up to 25% or gets 25% straight off their Connecticut taxes. And I've got investors from California who take advantage of it and then sell the tax.
Sure. Yeah,
So
there's
it's
a
great.
market for those things.
So that's a good reason for that.
Yeah, again, Connecticut cares and wants your business, unlike New York. You sir in the blue.
Earlier in the CBC discussion, references about how they evolve, right? That if you are now strictly a financial investor and you do not have a corporate or have a strategic view of a project that you're in, because you want to partake at it, you feel that it's that's A, B, you want more than one strategic investment.
I mean, yeah, I think I was commenting about this before that we're, very open to corporates co-investing with us. And I mean, generally the deal has to be structured correctly. So there's sort of no voting controls. Generally, they're not sitting on the board, things like that, might have like a different level of information rights or something like that. But I mean, I think it's very additive in most cases for a company, especially where there's like strong alignment on also a business deal. I mean, I'm trying to think. Yeah. I mean, we have a bunch of companies in which we have more than one, side by side.
Yeah, I think more than one would be a good thing. Yeah. It keeps everybody honest. And auction, exactly.
For sure. Miss.
Hi there, and thanks so much for the comments. My name's Monica, and I'm from the AI design that understand consumers. And I have a question about the people who projects, what kind of look into that space. Do you have any advice for sort of pre-product market fit startups working with enterprises to avoid becoming their handlers, potentially before the company gets scaled up? Do you have any guiding principles for avoiding that while still seeking those enterprise
Yes.
Danielle, go for it.
I guess I can take a little bit of this. One is to find your Sherpa. So Kevin mentioned, Kevin's role at Amazon is to basically help guide. Good companies now have startup Sherpa. I call them the Sherpa, right? The person whose job it is to work with the founder in representing you to other parts of the business. They also will help you manage a relationship with the business leaders. And that holds you both accountable. So if you are promised that you're going to get paid to do a pilot with a specific team, they help you manage that relationship so it isn't completely on you. And I think that if you don't have somebody like that at a company, you have to assign someone or be that person in your own team who is almost serving as that product manager and being incredibly transparent on timelines, et cetera. It's really, so much of it comes down to communication. And the other thing I was going to say is just like you would have multiple strategics on a board, you need to find advocates in the company and not just one. Every company has layoffs, maternity leaves, paternity leaves, the list goes on. And so you might find that one person you think you're selling to, and all of a sudden they now work at Google and they're not at Amazon anymore. And so finding the team, not just one person, I think is really important, and establishing relationship and project managing it as close as you can.
I'd like to add some. Is this on?
Yep.
Yeah, I'd like just to add something a little bit more tactical around engaging with a company like this. When you're a small startup and you're working with a big player, it can often feel like the relationship is very weighted in one direction, and it is. But I think it's really important to make sure that you have NDAs in place, that if you're sending them information that or data that they're analyzing it, that they provide, feedback to you. There's things that you can structure into these agreements at a very early stage so they're not entirely tilted in one direction. And don't be afraid to ask for that, because that ultimately will protect you. If you're a really early stage business and you haven't filed patents yet, it might not be a good time to engage with another party. You probably want to get that all squared away. So just be really thoughtful about what you've done to protect yourself. And then when you have these agreements in place, to ask for what you think you can, get to try and get some balance in the relationship. So you are getting some value back. You're not just giving them everything.
And when these things work really well, they're really designed partnerships and they're structured that way so that the trade-off is that you're going to give them very advantageous financial terms, possibly for years into the future. And in exchange, they will be your alpha customer and help you design and build the product, including dedicating their resources to that, right? And when you can find that kind of relationship, that's really valuable because you've already proven that it's something that they want because they're willing to invest their team's time in it. And then they're going to give you that valuable early customer feedback that's going to help you build a product that other customers that look like them will also want. It's very hard to do that without a pre-existing relationship, but that's kind of what you're looking for early on.
I agree with all that. And also, all this is excellent advice. The other thing to think about, like at Amazon, someone's probably thinking about your idea. So trust your instincts, make the right relationships, get the right NDAs in place, but also accept the fact that someone in this organization is probably thinking about your idea, and don't lose tons of sleep over it if they're doing something similar. Like one of the products I use all the time, their founders very vocal that they thought Amazon really screwed them over. Launched a similar product. Guess what? Amazon totally bombed. Didn't ever work. They're still kicking ass. You can Google it. But it's out there
with your Comcast internet.
Exactly. But I like, you also realize again, you have to be protective of your ideas. You have to if you feel like you're getting fleeced, you probably are getting fleeced. But at the same time, all those negative cycles you're going to spend thinking, oh man, I had a 30-minute meeting with Amazon, and 2 years later they launched the product. They were already thinking about it probably. So try to minimize the kind of the negative impacts in there. Because it's just not helpful, and it's happening. Google's doing everyone's thinking about it all the time, right? And so just again, Sherpa can be super helpful. I know I was working with a company out of TechStars Boston. They were super interested in launching this product. We found someone who said we're going to launch the same thing. So I'm like, okay, we're just going to stop talking to that team. Well, guess what didn't happen, and guess what started still doing it. So there's all things to think about.
And just one other thing is to be really mindful about is oftentimes if you do have a strategic partner, they want you to start shaping things to fit their needs. And that can be your death. So if you have the vision, stay with your vision. If a strategic is driving you down a path that is only good for that strategic, you really need to ask yourself, what's the bigger opportunity here? Is it just for that customer? Will this only work for them? Because once you start getting customized to one of the whatever size companies, you've now taken your eye off your ball.
So I think we can do one more question before they kick us out of the room. And you've had your hand up for a while, so.
Thanks. Fred Ellingham, one of the EIRs. My question, you had said something about alternative funding services. It's led me to think, are there some things going on in the funding side that are changing what we do every day? So there's innovation in the funding, and maybe like a securitization or something else going on that's going to actually help us with all this.
So I will mention what I meant by that. And every woman in this room and person of color in this room knows the funding stats, but I'll just reiterate that only 2.2% of all VC funding goes to women. And I think 1% for people of color at this point. And so it continues to be a shocking statistic that in the 12 years that I've been doing this work has not changed. It's actually gone down. So I just am a believer that there will be a movement, most likely by women and people of color, who are going to decide to start investing in ourselves. And I don't know what that looks like yet. It may exist today in community development funds, as an example, or different forms of grants. But the number of people who would tell me over the years that what I was doing should be, oh, have you considered turning that into a nonprofit? I can't tell you how many times I have heard that, and I'll bet you've never heard that. So I would love to hear some of the other options that are out there, how people are fundraising. Not everyone in this room is going to get VC funding. That's the fact. And so what else is to come?
I'll add to this because our company is, because of the high capital requirements, we encourage them to seek out non-dilutive capital. So obviously with the CHIPS Act, Inflation Reduction Act, SBIR grants, ARPA-H that I'm involved with, there's a ton of government initiatives, obviously, to help, the valley of death, essentially, right? And so there's a ton of capital out there from the government right now that, with some hard work and some coaching and some grant writing, is achievable.
Find the Sherpa for the SBIR.
Absolutely.
I look at that and think, not a chance in hell. You ask Warren Katz, he's like, why would you fund any other way?
Well, this is great. Thank you to our panelists. This was really